Hello everyone, welcome to Tripp Advisor, another Tabletop Tuesday board game tutorial and review scheduled today. Today, we will be traveling back 2,000 years to the Roman Empire, where we will guide one of the Roman dynasties to lands around the Mediterranean, developing trading networks, expanding our territory, and attempting to appease the ancient gods, all in an effort to emerge victorious. As today, we explore the 2 to 5 player economic strategy game, Concordia. So as always, pull up a chair. You're welcome to join me at the table. We'll take the game to the table. I'll walk you through how it plays, and then we'll come back up and I'll give some of my final thoughts. All right, here's all the components of Concordia laid out on the table. You've got the game board. It's actually a two-sided game board. This is the side we'll be using today. This is called the Imperium side of the board. It's recommended for 3 to 5 players, it says in the rulebook. The flip side is just a smaller area. It's just basically an expanded version of Italy. The Italia side of the board is recommended for 2 to 4 players. I would suggest 2 to 3 players use the Italy, and 4 or 5 players definitely you want to use this side of the board. Each player has a color. There's red, yellow, blue, green, and black in this game, and so there'll be a little bag of all the components for each player. Talk about those shortly when we set up. Each player will also get a corresponding storehouse where they will store all of their goods in front of them. Speaking of goods, this container doesn't come with the game, but spoiler alert, I take care of the games I really enjoy. So I've got the rest of the components here in this little box. There are 5 resources in the game you'll be collecting throughout the course of the game and using. You'll store those in your storehouse. Brick, wheat, grain, you've got your anvil, you've got your wine, and you've got your wool or cloth. Also, there are money. There's an economic game. You'll be collecting money throughout the course of the game. And these tokens I'll get to shortly during the setup. With all of the resources, they will go on the various locations around the board during the setup at the beginning of the game. Also, not only does each player get some player tokens, each player gets their own sort of personality deck of cards. They're an identical set of 7 cards to begin the game. They'll begin with those in hand, and I'll walk through how those are used during the game play. Again, I've taken good care of this one. I actually added sleeves to the cards. It doesn't come with sleeved cards, but some of my favorite games I like to take a little extra special care of. Of course, it comes with a rule book finally as well. One thing I really enjoy about this game is the rule book's not too daunting for a strategy game. It actually comes with 3 small resources. You've got basically the rule book game material. That's literally just 1 page open front and back. Really easy to sink your teeth into this game. Those of you who like a little bit of history, this is a little bit of an appendix. It talks about the history of the Roman Empire and all the various locations throughout history within that. And also, this is nice too. It comes with just a little game setup, just sort of a little 1-page overview. If you're learning the game or you need a quick refresher after a few plays, you can keep that nearby as well. And so those are all the components of Concordia. Now let's get to the setup. Okay, here's the board fully set up for a game of Concordia. Just for the sake of simplicity, I'm simulating a setup for a 2-player game. I've got the red color here and the blue color here. So the first thing you'll want to do is you'll want to take these 2 starting token discs and just put them on the scoring track at 0. This game, unlike most, you won't be doing the scoring during the game. You'll do all of the scoring at the end of the game, so those can just sit there until final end game scoring. Also, you'll want to set up your player mat. So each player is given a storehouse, and you'll want to put 2 colonists on foot and 2 on boats on your storehouse, along with 2 food tokens. You'll get a cloth token, a tools token, a brick token, and a wine token. Each player will start with those resources and those 4 colonists. Talk about those shortly. 2 that travel by land, 2 that travel by sea. Once you get a little more familiar with the game, there is a variant where rather than starting with those standard resources, you're just given 25 sestertii, that's the currency in the game, and you can choose how to spend the starting funds to buy a combination of starting goods. The purchase price for each is listed here on the top of your player board. But for the sake of simplicity, again today, this is the recommended standard starting resources on each player's storehouse. You'll see also on the board here, in the province of Italy, in Roma, each player will start with 2 colonists, 1 colonist which will travel by land, signified by the brown travel routes, and 1 colonist which will travel by sea, as depicted in the blue travel routes. So each player gets 2 of those. Rome is the starting location for all players. You'll see also on the board I've put all of these city tokens. If I take a few of them off, let me take the 3 off here in Italia. You'll see when I first set up the board, they have letters on them labeled A, B, C, or D. The 3 in Italia all have the letter D. So when setting up, you're going to want to take all 30 of these city tokens, you shuffle them and flip them upside down, and you'll just match. Each one has a corresponding letter A, B, C, or D on them. And so each game will look a little bit differently. You just have to make sure that the correct letters correspond with the letters on the board, and then you can flip them up. So in this case, in Italia, I've got 3 locations. 1 where I can get some brick, 1 where I can get some cloth, and 1 where I can get some tools. So you're going to want to do that for all of the various regions on the board to start. There's 30 of them. Those are the city tokens. After you've laid out all of those city tokens, there's another type of token in the game on the board up here in the top corner. These are the bonus markers. How you determine which bonus markers go where. Notice there's 3, 6, 9, 12 regions up here corresponding to the 12 regions on the board. And you'll look at each region. So let me use right here Germania as an example. I'll see in Germania there are 2 city tokens. There is a brick and there is a tool. You want to look at which is the most expensive, the most valuable resource in each region. So in this case, again, if you're not sure, refer to your player board here. Brick is the least valuable, cost of 3. Food costs 4. Tools 5. Wine 6. And cloth 7. So in the case of Germania, Germania is more as tools, which is more valuable than brick. So I will put a tool token on the spot beside Germania, signifying that corresponds to the most valuable item or resource in that region. Moving next door here, same with Britannia. I have food and I have wine. Wine is a more expensive resource than food is, so I've placed a wine token here in Britannia. You'll do that for all 12 regions as I've done here, laying out those bonus tokens. We'll talk about the importance of those during the gameplay, but that's what you need to do for the setup. You want to make sure, again, each player has their own unique color-coded player deck, 7 cards. So the blue team has their deck of 7. The red player has their deck of 7. Each player can be distributed a player aid guide on one side. It tells you the costs of purchasing colonies, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And on the other side, it talks about how the scoring works at the end of the game for the various cards. So one player can get a player aid each. And the final thing you want to do during the setup is the large deck of cards that say Concordia on them. They'll have Roman numerals on them. Some will have Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through 5. If you're playing a 5-player game, you'll keep all of them in play. We're simulating a 2-player game, so I'm only keeping the ones with Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2. You can shuffle the individual ones, but you want to place Roman numeral 1 on top of Roman numeral 2, etc., etc., if you were playing with more players. Then I'm going to take the top cards off the deck, and I'm going to fill these 7 spots here. So I'm just literally going to flip the cards up, and these are the cards that can be purchased throughout the game. So once I've got 7 of those flipped up, I'll just leave the rest of the deck that have not been used yet to the side. Once the cards have been flipped over and distributed, the last part of the setup is to determine starting player. You can do that in any way you want. Normally I will just take one color from each and drop one over my hand. In this case I dropped the blue, so blue will go first. And the starting player begins with 5 Sisteri, 5, that's the money in the game. And the second player gets 1 additional. They will get 6. The value of the tokens, the money tokens are 1, 2, 5, and 10. If there was a third player, they would get 7, fourth player 8, fifth player 9. And that is the setup for Concordia. Now let's dig into the gameplay and the game flow together. Okay, let's talk about the game flow, the game play. Basically, on each player's turn, and it is a turn-based game, it goes in clockwise motion around the table. Starting with the first player, they will look at their hand of 7 cards, and on a player's turn, they will decide which card they want to play and take the appropriate action associated with one of the 7 cards in their hands. And so let me walk through the 7 starting cards, as well as some of the other cards that are available to be purchased, just to explain the options available to each player on their turn of the game. The first card I will explain is this card here called the Architect. The Architect card, I'll just read it. It says, move your colonists, then build in cities adjacent to your colonists. And so if I'm starting player blue, I can play this Architect card down. I play it face up so everybody around the table can see the card I've played. And that allows me to move my colonists. These are the colonists. We start with 2 colonists each in Italy. And because I have 2 on the board, I get a maximum of 2 movements. Now I can move one of them 2 spaces, or I can split my move between colonists. And then basically when you make a move, you don't go on the city, you go on either the blue colored line if you're on the water, or the brown colored line if you're on land. So in this case, let's say, just for the sake of explanation, an example here, let's say I wanted to move the boat over here 1 space, and I can move this fellow on the land up here 1 space. After moving my colonists 2 spaces, I then have the opportunity to build cities in the cities adjacent to the colonists I just moved, or other colonists that might be on the board later in the game. So in this case, I'm adjacent here to this city here, which has a tool on it, and I'm also adjacent to this city here that has a brick on it. And now this is where I could build if I had enough funds and enough of the resources in my storehouse. So a quick look at my storehouse shows me what I have here. On the little player aid card you start the game with, you'll also see the cost to buy cities in the various locations. So anytime a person wants to buy a city that has a brick on it, it costs 1 food and 1 coin. To build in any other type of city other than brick, it costs 1 of that type plus 1 brick. Plus the costs get higher as you go to the more valuable resources. So for food, it's a food, a brick, and 2 coins. For tools, it's a tool, a brick, and 3. Wine is a wine, a brick, and 4. And for a cloth city, it's a cloth, a brick, and 5 tokens. So in this case, the blue player has both a tool and a brick and $3. So I would be able to build one of my cities. So I take one of my little city tokens and now I place it on top of that city, showing that I have a city in that location. I cash in the resources back into the stock. That now leaves me with 2 coins left. And then here also, because I do have a food and I do have $1, the 1 Sisteri, the 1 coin cost, I can cash those in as well, leaving me with 1 coin remaining, and I can put a second city in the brick city there. So that is what the architect does. It allows you to move your colonists, and I'll show you how you can get more colonists on the board. If I were to have 3 colonists on the board, I'd be able to move 3 steps. In this case, I was only able to move 2 steps, and I was enabled to build 2 cities because I had enough resources and enough currency on hand. So that leaves me with a few resources left in my storehouse. That is the architect card. Another option is playing the prefect card. And you start with 2 of these prefect cards in your hand. Every player will start with 2 of them. What the prefect card does, it allows you to collect resources for one of the 12 regions on the board. So if it came back to my turn, and now having built cities in these particular regions, it might be to my advantage now to play a prefect card to accumulate some resources from one of the 2 cities in which I just built. So let's say, for an example, I want to activate the territory of Italia. What I would then do is I would identify, I want to collect for Italia, and I would collect everyone who has cities in Italia. So for the sake of example, let's say the red player had moved on his turn and had built a city. Let's say the red player did the same thing, moved down there, and they built 2 cities as well here and here. If I claim Italia, I would get a brick because I have a city in brick. So I would take a brick, I would put it in my storehouse. Again, there's only a certain amount of slots in the storehouse. Once the storehouse is full, you can't hold any more goods. But as you put more colonists on the board, you will gain more space in your storehouse. So I would gain the brick. The red player, because they have a piece of that territory as well, even though it's not their turn, they would gain a tool. Of course, they would have had to pay some resources to build there. And then the player who plays the prefect, who triggers the prefect, who triggers the accumulation of resources, they get to go over here to the bonus tokens, and they get to get the bonus for that territory. So in this case, the bonus in Italia, the most expensive good in the region, is cloth. So they would also get a cloth, which they could place in their storehouse. Once any territory has been triggered using the prefect, you now flip over that, showing that no longer is that territory bonus active. On one side of each of these is the highest valued resource in their location. On the other side of the token, it simply has a 1 or 2 coins. And so I'll flip that over. And so the more these prefect cards are played, the more of these regions are going to be activated. The bonus tiles will continually be flipped over. The reality is that later in the game, let's say, for example, a number of these regions have already been activated. Rather than activating another region, I can choose to take all the money that is showing on the bonus token board here. And so that's the other option. So in this case, you would just add up all the coins, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, 10, 11. Rather than taking any resources, you can just choose to reset the bonus token. You would take 11 coins, and then you would flip all of the bonus markers back, essentially resetting them all for future prefect cards to be played. So those are the 2 options when you play a prefect. Either you're collecting, everybody who has a piece or a city in the region will collect the appropriate resources, as well as the person who played the prefect will get the bonus token. If, for example, even if I had a city in the cloth of Italy, I would get 1 for the city, but I would get a second one because the bonus tile is available there. That's how the prefect card works, and each player starts with 2 of those in their starting hand. A third card option is the Mercator. Everybody starts with 1 of those Mercator cards in their hand. When you play the Mercator, you immediately get 3 Sisteri, 3 coins, and you can trade up to 2 goods. So if I was a little light on money, as I am here, I only have 1 token, perhaps I can choose to trade my 2 cloth in my possession. They are each worth 7. So that would be 14. And in exchange for those, I can either get the money back or I could get a second good, type of good, coming back. So for example, perhaps I wanted more brick because brick is required to build everything except brick. So I may want to change 2 of those for 2 brick. So the 2 cloth are worth 14 minus 3 for each brick. That's 8. And then plus the 3 additional ones you get from playing the card. So it would be a net gain of 11 coins plus the 2 brick. So the Mercator card is a way to get the resources you're looking for. Very important to remember, though, that it's only 2 types of goods can be traded. You can either get rid of 2 types of good for cash. You can grab 2 types of good for the cost of them. But more often than not, you're offloading 1 type of good for a second type of good, coming back, working out the difference in the cost as well, or the reward. Each player starts with 1 of those Mercator cards. Should be noted too that once the card has been played, they stay on the table until a certain card you play triggers you picking up all of the cards you played previously. So that's the Architect, that's the Prefect, and that's the Mercator. Another card in your hand that you start with is the Diplomat. Now, the Diplomat card is a unique feature. It doesn't have an action in and of itself, but it allows you to copy an opponent's top card. So, for example, if I've already played my Architect, but I really want to use an Architect again to be able to move and build somewhere else on the board, I might be able to use my Diplomat, seeing that my opponent, their previously played card is the card I want to mirror or I want to copy. In that case, I can play my Diplomat card. I choose which opponent. In this case, there's only 1 opponent to choose from, and I would be able to imitate, to copy their most recent card that they have played, and simply do the action that you would like to do. That's how the Diplomat works. 2 other types of cards you start with your hand in your hand. The next card is the Senator card. Now, the Senator card allows you to look at these cards here, these 7 cards that are available, and this is how you can purchase more cards to immediately add to your hand. The beauty of this game is, on the one hand, you're wanting to expand your territory, you're wanting to get more cities, which leads to more points and leads to more resources coming in, but at the same time, you want to collect more cards throughout the course of the game as well, because the more cards you have, the more points you will get in the end game scoring, and the more options you will have to play on your turn. So by playing the Senator card, that allows you to purchase up to 2 of the 7 cards that are showing face up on the top of the board here. Now, of course, moving from left to right, these get more expensive. As you can see here, the first card up for sale here is the Prefect card. And on this card, there's simply a wine token. That means it costs 1 wine to purchase that card. As you go from left to right, things get more pricey because not only are you paying the resource that is on the card, for instance, the next card over moving left to right is another Mercator. This is 1 wine, but there's also a question mark below it on the board. That means it costs not only 1 wine, but 1 other resource of my choice. As I move even further to the right, it's not only paying the resources on the cards, but also adding cloth, or up to even 2 cloth as you get down to the right side. In this case, if I were to purchase these 2 cards, I would pay the appropriate resources. I would immediately add them to my hand. I would slide the cards down to the left and immediately flip up the next 2 cards on top of the deck, revealing 2 more cards up for grabs for future Senator cards being played. That leads to the last card in hand, which is the Tribune card. The Tribune card does a couple things. The Tribune card is what allows you now to pick up all previously played cards and put them back in your hand. Also, the Tribune card is one way to get another colonist out in Roma off of your player mat. In order to do that, you need to pay a food and a tool, If you can pay a food and a tool, you're able to, your choice, either a colonist that moves on land or a colonist that moves by the water. And once that is done, you collect all your cards in your hand that you've played. You take them back into your hand. But before you do that, you count all the cards you have played, including the tribunes. So in this case, I've played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You remove 3 cards from the total, leaving me 3. So I will get all my cards back in my hand, but I'll also get 3 coins as well. A little more incentive to wait longer to play more cards. You remove 3 from the equation. All the rest of the cards total the amount of coins you will collect going into the next round. So in this case, I would collect 3 coins. And then I would have all the cards back in my hand, including the ones I purchased from the auction here, from the display area. These are called personality cards. And so the game continues in that fashion. In clockwise order. 1 card is chosen from the hand. It's played. Follow the instructions on the card. A couple of rules to bear in mind about movement. Again, the movement are always on these lines adjacent. So from here, if I wanted to move 1 space, so I could hop over to here, because that is 1 step away. You never end your turn on the city. It's always either on the water or on the land, and you can always choose to build adjacent cities. Now, throughout the course of the game, especially with a higher player count, with 4 or 5 players, you're going to find out that there's going to be a lot of cities being built in a lot of areas. There's an advantage to being the first player to build, but let's say, for example, the blue player wanted to build here where the red player already has a city. Anytime there's a second city built on the same location, it doubles the cost, just the cost of the coin. So this first one cost, if you look at your player aid, it costs 3 coins, a tool, and a brick to build on a tool city. Well, the second one would cost double that. It would cost 6 coins and a tool and a brick. Of course, the next time Italia is scored and resources are collected, now both the blue team and the red team would get a tool because they both have a city in that location. If there was a third player and a third player wanted to build there, it would be tripled, etc., etc., etc. So eventually, during the course of the game, you'll have to double and triple up various cities, but it gets quite costly to do so. Let me just take a couple minutes to talk about some of the other cards that you'll see in play during the course of the game that aren't necessarily in your starting hand, but you will see as the game progresses. They're all color-coded, and we'll talk about each color. Each color corresponds to how they are scored at the end of the game. But let me just explain some of these cards briefly. A number of these cards are green at the bottom. They're called Minerva. Each color is signified by a different ancient Roman, Greek god or goddess. And so the Minerva cards, there's one related to each of the 5 resources in the game. For example, this one here is the Mason. And on the Mason card, it says you produce bricks in all of your brick cities. So for example, if I had cities in 4 different locations that have brick on them, and I was to play this card, I would simply just collect 4 brick immediately. Also at the bottom of these cards, it shows the resource, and it has a little number with a laurel wreath. Anytime you see a laurel wreath, that relates to scoring at the end of the game. So this card at the end of the game will give me 3 points for every brick city I have built in. Likewise, there's a farmer, there's a smith, there's a wine, and there's a cloth token. When you have those cards in your hand, the same applies. This one, every time I play it, I collect in all my tool cities, and I get 3 points for every tool at the end of the game. Here, I get 3 points for every food at the end of the game. The wine and the cloth tokens are worth 4 and 5 points for every city because they're a little more pricey and more expensive to get. So those are the 5 green Minerva cards that will come into play potentially during the course of the game. We've already seen the architect and we've already seen the diplomat. Some of those will come multiple cards throughout the course of the game. And depending on your strategy, you might want to collect multiple of the same throughout the course of the game. This orange card here is the colonist. This is another way that you can get new colonists out during the course of the game. Whenever you play that card during the course of the game, you can build as many colonists as you like. Unlike the Tribune card I showed you, where you only build colonists in Roma, this colonist card allows you to build a colonist in any city you have built. So if you've stretched to the far reaches of the map and you don't want to start back in Roma, you can play this card, and for the cost of a food and a tool, you can build a new colonist or multiple colonists if you have enough resources to pay for them, and you can spread them out anywhere you have already built cities in the game. It is an orange card, so at the end of the game, how the orange cards are scored, for every colonist you have, there's a maximum of 6. If you get all of them out, you'll have 6 colonists in play, so each orange card could potentially be worth 6 times 2, 12 points at the end of the game. Those are most of the cards. There are some other cards that you will see during the course of the game, but they're pretty self-explanatory, and you'll be able to teach yourself what those do quite quickly. But let me just talk about some of the end game scoring, how that works. For example, I've already talked about how the green cards score, and I've already talked about how the orange cards score. Green cards for various types of cities that you have built, and the orange cards for the number of colonists you have during the course of the game. For every blue card you have during the course of the game, and the blue cards are often on the architect cards, but they're on other cards as well. Basically, for the architect card, or the Jupiter cards, for every city that you have built that is not brick, any city that's not brick, you get 1 point. You have 15 cities that can be built during the course of the game. So let's say, for the sake of example, I built 14 out of those 15, and 10 of them were not brick cities. That means for every blue card, I will get 10 points. And so if you're building a lot of cities during the course of the game, you may want to accumulate quite a few of these blue cards, because each one will be worth 10, 11, 12 potentially points based on the number of non-brick cities you have built throughout the course of the game. That's how the Jupiter cards are scored. And again, they multiply by as many of those cards as you have in hand at the end of the game. Also, there are these yellow Saturn cards. Now, the yellow Saturn cards, much like the Jupiter card, you're looking at not simply how many you have built, but how many regions you have built in. Again, there are 12 regions on this map. If I've managed to build successfully in 11 out of those 12 regions, then each of these yellow Saturn cards would be worth 11 points at the end of the game. So again, if you're going for a lot of yellow cards, your strategy will naturally be to try and spread out to build in as many regions as possible to maximize the scoring on each of these Saturn cards. So you've got the Mars cards that are orange, the blue cards that are Jupiter, the green Minerva cards that are specific to different types of resources that are being built. The other color we haven't talked about is on these Mercator cards. It is the brown Mercury. These are scored not for as many cities as you've built, but on how many different types of cities you have built upon. Again, there are 5 different types of resources: brick, and food, and tool, and wine, and cloth. For each different type of city you have built you have managed to build upon during the course of the game, you will get 2 points each. So it is possible that each of these cards, if you built on all 5 types, are worth 10 points each at the end of the game as well. Gameplay continues in a clockwise fashion around the table. The game end is triggered in one of 2 ways. One way the game can end is when a player builds their 15th and final city on the board. That's one way the game end is triggered. And the second game end trigger is when the last of these personality cards from the deck, in this case a 2-player game, I'm only using Roman numeral 1 and 2, it'll be a quicker game. Once the last card has been purchased, that triggers the game end. The trigger means that the player who triggered the game end gets, one of 2 things happens. They get this Concordia card here, this sort of greenish blue card signifies they get a bonus of 7 points. So they add that to their hand. That's worth 7 points. That means that every other player around the table now gets one final turn, one last opportunity to play a card and take an action. One rule I failed to mention early on is that whichever player starts the game last gets this card here. It's called the Prefectus Magnus card. And whenever a player holding this card plays the prefect, choosing to collect goods from a certain region, including the bonus, it means their bonus action will be doubled. So for example, again, going back to the Italia example, if the red player had built here in the cloth, they would play that. They wouldn't only get the bonus once, but they would get it twice. So they would get double cloth in this case. Once that card has been used, it is passed counterclockwise to the next player around the table, meaning that the next opportunity they take the prefect card, collecting a bonus, they would be able to use it. If I hold this card, I play the prefect card, and I'm not taking the bonus, but I'm merely taking the coins and resetting the bonus, I hang on to this card until I use the prefect to take the bonus, in which it's doubled. So that card will be passed around the table throughout the course of the game. Once the game ends, put all your cards on the table, color coordinated, score them as I've outlined how the scoring works for each type of card. Move the scoring track, move the sort of the tokens around the scoring track, and the winner is the player with the most points. In the case of the tie is broken by the player who is at the end of the game is owning this Prefectus Magnus card, or by the tied player who would receive this next during the course of the game. And that's the gameplay and the game flow for Concordia. All right, final thoughts time for Concordia, which, spoiler alert, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag right now, and you may have already guessed, given the way I sleeve the cards, and I bought a separate container here for all the components. Concordia is one of my favorite games. If I were to count my 5 favorite games on one hand, Concordia would be on my short list of favorite games. Let me tell you some of the reasons why. Let's look at the report card. First, the theme. The theme isn't unique, of course. There are many other games that take place in the Roman Empire or empires past where you're exploring, you're expanding territory. But this one really fits for me. It works. It's an immersive theme. It gives that sort of feel that you're exploring and expanding, the playing of cards and the expanding of the territory. It works for me. I enjoy the theme. I'll give it an A. As far as the aesthetics, maybe the worst thing about the aesthetics is the box art. And just as it's true, the old saying, don't judge a book by its cover, I think the same holds true for board games. Sometimes you shouldn't judge a board game by its cover. And I don't think this is the most attractive board game cover. This doesn't really scream at me, oh, buy me. I'm going to be an intriguing game. But this symbol right here is always a factor. It won the prestigious Kennerspiel Award, German Strategy Game of the Year in 2014. And hey, I don't buy games primarily for what I see on the box. It's what's inside, like a book, that counts. And what is inside is simply beautiful. The aesthetic value of the board, the components are well made, the cards. I mean, aesthetically, this is a beautiful game on the table. I'll give it an A for its aesthetic value beyond the box art. How about the replayability? Well, this is one area where this game really shines for me. I would say I would match this against any game in my collection for replayability. This game simply doesn't get stale, it doesn't get boring, it doesn't get old. I don't think this game will ever outlive its time on my shelf because each game is unique. There are some strategy games where you play it enough, you can sort of figure out the optimal strategy, and you just go in one direction, you'll win. That can take away from the replayability and the fun and the enjoyment and the uniqueness of the game. Not so with Concordia, because the board is set up differently every game, and because different players are going to be playing cards in different order every game, affecting the flow of the game differently. I might go into the game thinking I'm going to go in one certain direction, but because of how the board is set up or because of what my opponents are doing, you really have to think on your feet or in your boat, in this case in the game, and you might have to adapt and adjust your strategy each time. And that is a really appealing part of this game for me. So the replayability, phenomenal, top notch. I give it an A+. What about the game length and the game flow? Well, on the box it says 90 minutes. On BoardGameGeek.com it says 100 minutes, and that typically is the window for a game. Again, depending on how many players you're playing, a 5-player game is going to be a little longer than a 2-player game, obviously. But from opening the box to packing the box back up, it's not unrealistic. After your first play or two, 2 hours total, which is a good length, I think, for a strategy game, a medium strategy game. This game doesn't drag. It's not going to be a 4-hour epic strategy game, nor is it going to fly by too fast. An hour and a half to 2 hours at most feels the perfect length for a game of this weight, sort of a medium strategy game. The game flow is great also. I don't often find this game stalls. Some strategy games you're waiting for one person 5-10 minutes to take their turn because you're simply looking at your cards. You're keeping one eye on what other people are playing. You're usually planning 1 or 2 or 3 turns ahead, so it keeps the game flowing. It keeps the game moving nicely, and so I give the game flow and the game length also an A+. For the type of game it is, it's the perfect length for me. Ease of play, and forgive me if the review, the tutorial didn't do justice to the elegance of this game. For a game of this weight, sort of a medium strategy game, this is not a difficult game. And it might have sounded like there were a lot of moving parts in the tutorial, but again, the rule book, I love it. I love a game that has enough depth to it, but you don't have to slog your way through a 20-page rulebook. This is a rulebook. 1 page, open, front and back, and that's all you really need. And they give you this beautiful little setup guide here. Game setup, 1 page. Set up this, set up this, set up this, set up this. So I love the way the game is laid out. It's got some depth to it, but it's not a difficult game to pick up. It says age 13 plus on the box. That's about right. My kids both handle this, and they're 10 and 13. They've been playing this one for a year or two. It's a little long for my daughter's liking, but my gaming group, my extended family, we enjoy this game very much, and the ease of play is solid. This is a game I can teach someone in no time, and you might play it through once for them to get the hang of it, and more often than not, they'll want to play it again right away or soon because they realize it's not too daunting, it's not too difficult. So the ease of play for this type of game is fantastic. I'll give that an A+ as well. Finally, tactics and strategy. It is a medium weight strategy game, and the appeal of Concordia for me as it relates to tactic and strategy is there's very little, if any, luck involved in this game. This is pretty much pure strategy, pure skill and strategy. There's no dice rolling. There's no, at the end of the game, oh, if only the dice would have fallen a different way, or only that card would have come out later or sooner, I would have done better. No, really, at the end of the day, you just look in the mirror and say, yeah, the better player won, or I should have done that differently. And I like games like that. If I want to play a strategy game, more often than not, I want it to be more strategic than luck. In most games, there is a little bit of a luck element, but I like games that at the very least sort of mitigate the luck, or in this case, remove most of the luck. Lots of tactics and strategy. It's not a combat-driven game. There's not a lot of take that, but it's important that you really kind of watch what other people are up to, what they're doing, to try and identify when to play the right card at the right time, when to grab the right city, when to grab the cards because somebody else might be going for that card to stop them or to get the card you want. There's a lot of tactics and a lot of strategy going on in this game, and I'll give the tactics and strategy an A+ as well. So I don't give out A+ like they're candy, but at the end of the day, Concordia is one of my favorite games. It's in my top 5, and I will give it an enthusiastic A+. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's review. I hope you will give Concordia a shot if you think it's something that you would enjoy. Thank you, as always, for joining me here on this Tabletop Tuesday. As always, you can like, you can share this video if you think others would enjoy this game. Also, you're welcome to subscribe to the channel. You can click on the notification bell and be notified whenever I produce future Tabletop Tuesday videos. I also produce Theology Thursday videos every week, as well as Film Friday reviews here at TripAdvisor. So whatever you decide to play, whether it's Concordia or something else today or this week, I hope you enjoy your time around the table. Game on.